Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The rain tapped gently on the glass windows of the small, two-bedroom apartment that Amaka had called home for the past 3 years. She sat alone on the worn-out couch, 8 months pregnant, her swollen feet propped up on a low stool, a towel draped over her shoulder to catch the sweat beading across her brow. Though visibly exhausted, her eyes glimmered with a mixture of hope and pain. She had spent the day preparing Desmond's favorite meal, egusi soup with pounded yam, and even managed to clean the house despite her condition. Her love for Desmond had always been her compass, a driving force that made her believe in their future, even when reality screamed otherwise. Tonight, she told herself, he might eat the food and notice her swelling ankles, maybe ask how the baby was doing. But when he walked in with the smell of expensive cologne and the shadow of another woman's perfume clinging to him, her fragile hope began to crack. Desmond barely acknowledged her as he dropped his keys on the table. "You're still awake," he muttered, scrolling through his phone. Amaka smiled weakly and stood up to serve him food, but he pushed the plate away without looking at it. "I ate out." The same excuse he had used for weeks. She tried to talk to him, ask him why he never touched her anymore, why he came home late, why he no longer smiled at her baby bump the way he used to, but Desmond snapped. "I'm tired of pretending, Amaka. I don't want this anymore." The words hit her harder than labor pains. She stood frozen, the plate in her hand trembling. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean I want a divorce," Desmond replied coldly. "There's someone else, and I don't want to keep lying to myself or to you." In that moment, the world around Amaka shattered like thin glass. She had given up her name, her wealth, and her father's protection for this man, only to be thrown away like trash when her love was most needed. Her knees buckled, and she held the edge of the table for support, her other hand protectively cradling her belly. "Desmond, I'm due in less than a month," she said, her voice shaking. "This is our child. How can you do this to us?" He rolled his eyes and turned his back to her. "You'll be fine. You're a strong woman. You don't need me." Amaka fell to her knees, tears flowing freely as she begged the man she loved to reconsider. But Desmond remained unmoved. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The papers will arrive tomorrow." Then, without a glance at her crumbling world, he picked up his car keys and walked out, leaving her sobbing on the cold tile floor. Amaka's body shook with grief, but in the depths of her despair, something inside her hardened. She didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of a transformation. What Desmond thought was an end would soon become her rise. Desmond reclined in the plush, champagne-colored armchair of a high-end hotel suite, sipping from a glass of whiskey, while Tonia, the woman who had ensnared his senses, laughed beside him. Everything about her screamed extravagance: long faux lashes, glittering jewelry, designer clothes with foreign tags still dangling, and an accent that hinted she'd been somewhere elite, or at least watched enough movies to fake it convincingly. She spoke of trips to Dubai, dinners in Paris, and a lifestyle Desmond only dreamed of. What he didn't realize was that her stories were stitched with lies and borrowed time. Tonia had mastered the art of illusion, and Desmond, blinded by ambition and lust, had walked right into her trap. The more she flashed her wealth, the more he saw Amaka as a burden, an anchor pulling him away from the life he thought he deserved. What Desmond didn't know was that Tonia worked as a senior executive assistant in a company owned by Chief Donald Obina, one of the most powerful and wealthiest CEOs in the country. A man feared by business tycoons and respected across continents. The very man whose daughter Desmond had married against his will. Tonia knew exactly who Amaka was, but she pretended not to know. She remembered the day Chief Obina warned her never to involve herself in his daughter's affairs. But Tonia, driven by greed and desperate to elevate her status, ignored him. To her, Desmond was the weakest link in the Obina dynasty. If she could pull him away and ruin him, she could climb into a circle she would otherwise never touch. So she played her part well: subtle flattery, strategic intimacy, and promises of connections Desmond longed for. Every fake laugh, Every stage dinner photo she posted online was another nail in his emotional coffin. Meanwhile, Desmond saw himself as evolving. He called Amaka old-fashioned, emotionally clingy, and incapable of helping him grow. "She just wants to stay at home and be fat with pregnancy," he said to Tonia one night, laughing cruelly. Tonia responded by running her fingers down his chest and saying, "You deserve better, babe. A woman who matches your energy." He didn't know her Instagram pictures were photoshopped. He didn't know the car she bought was a company vehicle she only used during work hours. Everything was smoke and mirrors, but Desmond was drunk on fantasy. He began to drain the little savings he had just to impress her. New suits, expensive dinners, and weekend getaways, all funded by a man who couldn't even afford baby items for his unborn child. But Desmond didn't care. In his mind, he had upgraded. He believed he was finally walking into the elite class. What he didn't know was that the same class had already rejected him, and soon he'd be kicked even lower. As days turned into weeks, Amaka's belly grew heavier, her back ached more, and her silence deepened. She moved like a ghost in the home that once radiated love and warmth. The house felt colder, even under the harsh Nigerian sun. Desmond had stopped coming home altogether, and when he did, he treated her like an unwanted guest. Amaka's friends had abandoned her, too, taking sides with what they saw on social media. Desmond posing with Tonia at luxury hotels, captioning their pictures with hollow words like power couple goals. But none of them knew that Amaka came from a bloodline that could buy and sell 10 of Desmond's dreams in a single day. Still, she kept her father's identity hidden, honoring the vow she made to Desmond when they married. To be his equal, not to overshadow him with her family name. But loyalty to the wrong person, she was learning, was a form of slow suicide. One afternoon, she mustered the strength to go to Desmond's office, hoping they could talk before things spiraled further. She wore the same white maternity gown she wore on their last date before marriage, thinking it might stir something in him, some fragment of memory, some spark of love. But when she arrived, she saw him with Tonia, laughing loudly as they stepped out of an elevator. She stood at a distance, heart in her throat, and watched as Desmond placed his hand possessively on Tonia's waist. He saw her. He knew she was watching. And still, he whispered something into Tonia's ear that made her laugh even harder. That moment tore something irreparably inside Amaka. She turned around and walked away, feeling the weight of betrayal crash down like a hammer. Her eyes burned, not just from tears, but from rage held back too long. She knew then that the man she had once loved was dead, replaced by a greedy imposter wearing his face. That night, as she lay on the bed holding her swollen belly, she whispered to her unborn child, "You and I will be just fine, my baby. He has made his choice, and now we'll make ours." She didn't call her father for help, not yet. Instead, she wrote a letter and placed it beside Desmond's untouched dinner, the same food she'd made with trembling hands. In the letter, she begged him one last time to think about their child, to remember their vows, to come home, if only for the sake of a life growing inside her. But Desmond never read the letter. He tossed it in the trash the moment he came in, too drunk and distracted to care. And in that act of carelessness, he signed his own downfall, because the woman he just abandoned was not just a wife. She was a warrior, a daughter of legacy, and soon the world would remember her name. It was close to midnight when Desmond came home, the sound of thunder rumbling in the distance as dark clouds gathered outside. Amaka had been in and out of contractions all day, though she kept telling herself they were Braxton Hicks. She sat by the front door, her hospital bag packed just in case, waiting, hoping he would walk in and offer her a kind word, even if just one. But the man who stepped into the room wasn't the man she married. Desmond's eyes were bloodshot from alcohol, and whatever lies Tonia had fed him to stoke his ego. He looked at Amaka like she was a stranger. She rose weakly to greet him, but he waved her off with a sneer. "Get your things," he muttered, slurring slightly. "I've already spoken to the landlord. You'll have to vacate this place by morning." The words sliced through her chest like a knife. She blinked in disbelief. "Desmond, are you throwing me out? I'm almost due." Desmond didn't respond with words. He went to the wardrobe and began pulling her clothes out, tossing them carelessly into the bag she had prepared for the hospital. She tried to hold his hand to stop him, but he pushed her aside and continued. Tonia and I are starting a new life. You can go and live with your father. Oh, wait, you cut him off, didn't you? Well, that's your business. I'm done pretending. The irony was cruel. He had always claimed to love her independence, to support her decision to walk away from her billionaire family and build something with him. Now he used that very loyalty as a weapon against her. Amaka fell to the floor as he dumped her final items at her feet. The pain in her back sharpened, but she refused to cry in front of him. Desmond picked up her hospital bag and threw it at the door. I'll give you money for a cab. That's all you're worth now. Outside, the rain had begun to pour heavily, flooding the compound. Amaka stepped out slowly, her hands wrapped around her belly, her eyes clouded with pain and disbelief. Neighbors peeked through their windows, but said nothing. Desmond stood at the door with an umbrella, shielding only himself, while she walked into the rain with her luggage dragging behind her. As the gate closed behind her, the last of her strength gave out and she collapsed in the mud. A nearby security guard saw her fall and rushed to help. She was rushed to a hospital by a good Samaritan who recognized her from her university days. She delivered a baby girl after hours of labor, screaming in pain, alone on a hospital bed under the cold glare of surgical lights. No husband by her side, no family to hold her hand. But something inside her shifted that night. Amaka didn't just give birth to a child. She gave birth to her rebirth. The woman who walked out of that delivery room wasn't broken. She was reborn in fire. The days after delivery were the most painful Amaka had ever experienced. Her body was bruised from labor, her stitches still raw, and her arms ached from cradling her newborn for hours without sleep. The nurses pitied her, whispering about the husband who never came. Some assumed she was a single mother by choice, others that she had been abandoned, but none knew the full story. She remained quiet, swallowing her tears as she looked at the beautiful child she had brought into the world. The baby girl had her nose and Desmond's eyes, a painful reminder of the man who discarded them like trash. Amaka named her Ziora, meaning blessing from God, because in her daughter's cries and coos, she found a reason to keep breathing. She had no money to pay the hospital bills, but before she could panic, her father's loyal aide appeared silently at the reception and settled everything, under strict orders not to reveal his identity. Amaka was discharged and taken to a furnished apartment in a quiet estate. She had no idea that it belonged to her father. Everything had been arranged discreetly through a lawyer instructed by Chief Donald Obina, who had been watching her ordeal from the shadows with a heavy heart. Though he had cut her off for marrying Desmond against his advice, he never stopped loving his only daughter. But Donald was a man of principle, and he had vowed to let her learn her lesson the hard way. Now that she had suffered enough, he was preparing for his return. Amaka, however, was still determined to survive on her own. She took up remote contract jobs using a pseudonym and began saving little by little. Her days were filled with diaper changes, breastfeeding, and midnight tears. She often cried in the bathroom so her baby wouldn't see her weakness. But each time she looked at Ziora's eyes, she wiped her own and kept moving. Back in Desmond's world, life was unraveling faster than he realized. Tonia's demands were growing heavier. More expensive dates, jewelry, spa days, and an upcoming trip to Dubai that she insisted he sponsor. Desmond began borrowing from colleagues and taking risky online loans. When he tried to sell his car, Tonia threw a tantrum. How do I show up at work with a man who can't even afford a car? She hissed. Desmond was beginning to realize that Tonia's luxury was nothing more than props for an empty stage. He noticed the way she flinched when real wealthy people talked. Her phone was always on silent, and her bills were always pending. But it was too late. He had thrown away his marriage, unborn child, and dignity for this illusion. What he didn't know was that Tonia was not just a mistress, she was a ticking time bomb. And Amaka, the woman he left in the mud, was quietly gathering strength to rise from the ashes. 3 years earlier, Amaka had stood barefoot on the cold marble floor of her father's estate, her eyes locked with his as she dropped the diamond-studded engagement ring he had bought her for another man. "I'm not marrying for money, Daddy," she had said. "Desmond loves me for who I am." Chief Donald Obinna had looked at her with steely eyes and said, "He loves what you have, not who you are. He will ruin you, Amaka." But Amaka was stubborn. She had met Desmond during NYSC camp in Abuja. He was charming, well-spoken, and appeared hard-working. He told her he didn't care about her background, that he loved her soul. For a girl who had grown up shielded by wealth and watched by guards, Desmond's independence felt refreshing. She snuck out to see him, lied to her friends about him, and when her father refused to approve the marriage, she packed her bags and left. That was the day her relationship with her father fractured like shattered glass. Amaka believed she was doing the right thing. She sold her luxury car, moved into a small flat with Desmond, and took on freelance writing jobs. They were broke, but she was happy, until little things began to change. Desmond started resenting her when she couldn't provide what her rich friends had. He grew impatient, mocking her efforts at work, telling her she was no longer attractive when she got pregnant. The man who once wrote her love poems now rolled his eyes when she entered a room. She still cooked, cleaned, and kissed him goodnight, even when he came home smelling of foreign perfumes. She told herself it was a phase, that every marriage had its storm. But deep inside, her soul began to bruise. She missed her father's stern advice, his quiet strength, and even his judgment. But her pride wouldn't let her go back, not yet. Chief Donald, for all his faults, had kept tabs on her. He never stopped monitoring her through private investigators. He watched her grow thin, watched her walk to antenatal appointments alone, watched her beg her husband on the roadside to come home. It broke his heart, but he allowed it. He needed her to see Desmond for who he truly was, not the fantasy she had wrapped in love. When she finally gave birth alone, he wept in silence. That was when he began to prepare. The world would soon know that the girl they mocked in rags was the princess of an empire. But not yet. First he would wait, until the stage was set, until Desmond dug his grave deeper, and until Amaka stood tall enough to walk into the courtroom, not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. Tonia stepped out of the elevator into the marbled hallway of Obinna Global Holdings, heels clicking like a ticking clock. Her outfit, a fitted navy blue suit with gold accents, screamed power, but it was borrowed power. She had taken it from another executive's closet and planned to return it before lunch. Her confidence, however, was unshaken. She had spent the morning on the phone bragging to a friend about how she was now living with a wealthy businessman and might soon marry him. But behind that fake bravado was a desperation she could no longer hide. She'd maxed out 3 credit cards, taken out a fake loan using her cousin's ID, and was now depending on Desmond to fund a lifestyle she could barely keep up with. She had no idea she was being watched. As she entered the conference room, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Chief Donald Obinna sitting at the head of the table, fingers interlocked, expression unreadable. "Tonia," he said calmly, gesturing for her to sit. She obeyed with a nervous smile. "I've been reviewing your department's recent expenditures," he began, "and I must say your sense of entitlement is impressive." Tonia laughed nervously. "Sir, he held up a finger. "Save it. I know where every naira has gone. I know about the company phones you sold. I know about the fake travel allowances. I even know that you forged my signature on the Dubai seminar budget." Tonia's blood ran cold. "Sir, I can explain." He cut her off again. "I didn't call you here to listen to lies. I called you here to tell you this. I warned you years ago to stay away from my daughter. You disobeyed. You lured her husband, not knowing who she was to me. Now you're parading like a queen, thinking you've won. But Tonia, this is chess, not checkers. And you're not even a pawn. You're just a broken piece someone left on the board." The room went silent. Tonia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her world tilted as she realized she had never been in control. As she left the office trembling, she couldn't help but feel the air around her tighten. The receptionist didn't greet her. The IT guy didn't smile. Her badge access blinked red instead of green. Something was happening, and she didn't understand it yet. Desmond called her that evening, whining about needing money for rent, and she snapped. "You're a liability, Desmond. I can't keep carrying you." But she said it not just out of frustration, it was fear. Fear that she was losing grip of everything. For the first time in her life, Tonia felt like the mask she wore was slipping, and the real her, the broke, insecure girl from a small-town school, was being dragged into the light. But the worst part? She didn't even know that her boss was the father of the woman whose life she had tried to destroy. The storm was no longer coming. It had already begun, and she was right at the center of it. Desmond stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie he couldn't afford, in a house he hadn't paid rent for in 3 months. Tonia walked past him wearing a new silk robe, one he didn't buy, and threw a bundle of fake eyelashes on the bed. "You're not driving that rusty car to pick me up today," she warned. "Call an Uber. Image is everything." Desmond nodded silently. He had mortgaged his pride so many times he barely recognized himself. He had sold his dignity for a taste of luxury, and now he was gagging on it. His bank account was in the red, his salary was already pre-loaned, and Tonia's demands were bleeding him dry. But he couldn't leave her. Why? Because he'd burned his bridge with Amaka. And even though he told himself he didn't care, part of him still woke up at night wondering what his child looked like. He hadn't seen the baby. He hadn't even bothered to ask. Tonia's business trips became more frequent, and Desmond started to suspect she was seeing someone else. He once found a message on her phone from a name saved as Chief D, reading, "We'll talk at the office. Don't do anything foolish." When he asked her about it, she laughed and claimed it was a business mentor. Desmond pretended to believe her, but doubt clung to him like sweat. He remembered how Amaka used to show him their bank statements and ask for his opinion. How she once skipped buying herself a maternity gown just so he could have new office shoes. His heart squeezed, but his ego silenced the ache. "You chose this path," he muttered to himself. "There's no going back." Yet even as he tried to comfort himself with that lie, he began to notice how everything around him was slipping. Friends stopped calling. Co-workers whispered behind his back, and Tonia grew colder with each passing day. The final blow came when his bank card was declined while trying to pay for a meal at a fancy restaurant Tonia had insisted on. She didn't even offer to help, just looked at him with disgust and said, "You're embarrassing me." He laughed awkwardly, told the waiter he would be right back, and stepped outside into the hot sun. There, under the weight of judgmental stares and empty pockets, Desmond finally admitted to himself that he had made a terrible mistake. But what he didn't know was that mistake had been observed, documented, and would soon be weaponized. At that moment, Chief Donald was finalizing a dossier with dates, receipts, and photographic evidence. And Amaka? She was quietly preparing for something greater than revenge. She wasn't going to take Desmond down. She was going to rise so high that his neck would snap just from looking up. Amaka woke up each morning to the coos of her daughter, Ziora, whose chubby arms waved joyfully from her cradle. The small apartment she now lived in wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful, a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. She moved with quiet purpose, rising early to feed the baby before settling into her remote work. With her degree in communications and a natural gift for writing, she secured freelance contracts under the name Amma Daniels, hiding her identity to avoid attention. Her earnings weren't much, but she managed. Every penny she made gave her back a piece of the dignity Desmond tried to strip from her. Every bottle of baby formula she bought reminded her that she could provide, not just survive. The pain hadn't left her, but she had learned to use it, to build, to rise, to become something greater than the broken woman who once begged a man to stay. Her father's aid checked in quietly, dropping supplies and sending funds anonymously. But Amaka refused to depend on it. She wanted to earn her way back, not for her father, but for herself. At night, she would sit by the window and talk to Ziora. "One day, you'll know what your mother survived," she whispered. "One day, I'll tell you how we rose from nothing and owned everything." And slowly, her fire returned. She enrolled in an online executive leadership program and aced every course. She attended secret workshops and mentorship classes arranged silently by her father's influence. And when the time was right, Chief Donald called her for a meeting. It was the first time they had seen each other in over 2 years. He stood in silence as she entered the office, holding her baby with grace and confidence. "You've grown," he said simply. "And you were right, Daddy," she replied. "But now, I'm ready to show the world who I am." From that day forward, Donald made a quiet declaration. The daughter he once feared would be ruined was now his greatest asset. He began pulling strings to position her in the company, offering her a directorship in a new brand initiative. Amaka didn't boast. She didn't gloat. She simply accepted with humility and a quiet plan. "When it's time," she said, "I want to face Desmond in court. Not for revenge, but for closure. For my child. For every woman who's ever been thrown away." Donald nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "You'll face him, Amaka. And this time, he'll kneel." As Amaka walked out of the boardroom with Ziora in her arms and determination in her soul, the storm clouds gathered over Desmond's fake paradise. The clock had started ticking, and this time it was counting down to justice. Desmond was sprawled across the living room sofa in nothing but shorts, sipping warm beer and scrolling through Tonia's filtered photos on Instagram, when a sharp knock echoed through the hallway. He groaned, assuming it was another debt collector. But when he opened the door, a man in a dark suit handed him a white envelope. "You've been served," the courier said curtly, before turning and disappearing down the stairwell. Desmond tore open the envelope with shaky hands, his eyes scanning the bold heading. "Notice of child support and custody proceedings, family court." His throat dried instantly. Beneath it, the names Amaka Obinna versus Desmond Ease stared back at him like a ghost from a past. For the first time since he abandoned her, reality caught up to him in the coldest way. The court date was set for 2 weeks' time. He laughed nervously at first, tossing the letter aside like it didn't matter. But deep inside, panic had already begun its slow creep. When Tonia walked in later that evening, shopping bags in hand, Desmond tried to play cool, but his agitation was obvious. "We have a problem," he muttered. "Amaka is taking me to court over child support." Tonia scoffed. "Let her. What's she gonna do? Cry in front of a judge?" But Desmond was shaking. "You don't understand. I never even checked on the child. I don't even know the baby's name." Tonia rolled her eyes. "Then lie. Say you tried. Judges don't care." Desmond wanted to believe her, but something in his gut told him this wasn't an ordinary woman he was about to face. Amaka had always been quiet, gentle, but he had seen that look in her eyes the night she walked away in the rain. It wasn't weakness. It was survival. He started pacing, mumbling to himself. Tonia, meanwhile, flipped through her phone, more concerned about what to wear for a company dinner than his rising anxiety. Unknown to both of them, Chief Donald Obinna was finalizing preparations for the court showdown. He had hired the most ruthless legal team in the country, led by Barrister Okizi, a man who had never lost a family court case. Amaka had remained calm through the entire process, refusing to engage in public battles or respond to Desmond's mockery. She simply showed up at legal briefings with her baby and a notebook, determined to get justice not just for herself, but for the daughter who would one day ask, "Where was my father when I was born?" In private, she still cried some nights. The trauma didn't vanish just because she looked strong. But she wiped her tears, kissed Ziora's forehead, and whispered, "This is for you." Desmond had no idea what was waiting for him. And Tonia, arrogant and unaware, was about to be dragged into a courtroom where every mask would be torn off and every lie exposed in brutal daylight. The days leading up to the court hearing felt like a slow-motion countdown to Judgment Day. Amaka remained composed, focused, and unshaken. She spent time reviewing her case with Barrister Okizi, providing documents that included prenatal records, eviction dates, and a shocking collection of screenshots and chat histories from Desmond's abandoned devices, collected by her father's private tech investigator. Every detail was now part of an airtight file of betrayal and neglect. Okizi smiled approvingly during one meeting and said, "They're not prepared for what's coming." Amaka only nodded, holding her child close. She didn't want a victory built on humiliation, but she wanted accountability. She wanted Desmond to look her in the eyes and see the woman he discarded now standing tall, unbroken, unbothered, and undeniably transformed. Her father watched silently throughout the process, his pride in her growing by the day. "I've always known you were strong," he said quietly, "but I never knew you were this fierce." Meanwhile, Desmond was unraveling. He had borrowed a suit from a friend, cleaned his dusty shoes, and tried to prepare some excuses for the judge. Tonia helped him rehearse, urging him to act humble and remorseful. "Cry a little," she said. "Judges eat that up." But Desmond knew that wasn't going to be enough. He had abandoned Amaka near her due date. He had never contributed a dime toward the baby's welfare. His Instagram page was filled with pictures of him gallivanting with Tonia, while Amaka was suffering alone. If even half of that was shown in court, he was doomed. Still, he showed up at the court building on the morning of the trial with his chest puffed up, sunglasses on, and Tonia holding his hand. They walked past reporters and spectators as if they were celebrities. "Let's get this over with," he whispered. "She's nothing without me." What Desmond didn't know was that the courtroom was already filled with silent tension and power. Judges, lawyers, and staff all whispered as Chief Donald Obinna entered the room minutes before the session began. His presence caused phones to light up across the city. He sat beside Amaka and gently lifted his granddaughter into his lap, a soft smile spreading across his face. "My granddaughter deserves the world," he whispered. Amaka turned to him and said, "We'll give her that." When Desmond walked into the room and saw Donald sitting beside Amaka, his legs nearly gave way. Tonia froze. "Why is your wife sitting with Chief Obinna?" she asked, her voice cracking. Desmond couldn't answer. The puzzle pieces fell together in that moment. Amaka's last name, her silence, her strength. And the truth hit him like a truck. He hadn't married a common woman. He had betrayed royalty. And now royalty was about to respond. The judge entered, and the courtroom stood. Amaka didn't flinch. She held her child close, eyes fixed on Desmond. Her expression was unreadable. Not angry, not vengeful, just calm. Desmond, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. Sweat gathered on his forehead as he sat beside his equally stunned mistress, who fidgeted under the eyes of journalists and court staff. The proceedings began swiftly, with formal introductions and opening remarks. Then Barrister O'Keezy stood, crisp in his designer suit, and said, "Your Honor, my client seeks full custody, child support, and legal protection from a man who not only abandoned her, but endangered the life of their unborn child by forcefully evicting her during late pregnancy." Desmond tried to interrupt, but the judge ordered silence. "We will hear from you when it's your time, Mr. Ease," she said coldly. O'Keezy continued, displaying photographs, medical reports, and witness statements, including a neighbor who confirmed seeing Amaka thrown out at night. Then came the most damning evidence, video footage from a hidden camera at their former residence, showing Desmond yelling at his heavily pregnant wife, hurling insults, and dumping her belongings in the rain. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Desmond's jaw tightened. Tonia buried her face in her hands. And then, the final blow, a sworn affidavit from Chief Donald Obinna stating that Desmond had deceived and dishonored his daughter while seeking personal gain through her silence. "Your Honor," O'Keezy said, "my client's lineage, though never flaunted, is one of national relevance. She is the only daughter of a man who has contributed more to this country's economy than any politician. But she never wanted wealth to define her marriage. She wanted love. And this," he gestured to Desmond, "is what she got in return." At that moment, Desmond slumped in his seat. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips trembling. Everything he built, every lie he told, every scheme he orchestrated, was falling apart in real time. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I didn't know," he whispered. The judge stared at him coldly. "You didn't know your wife was pregnant when you threw her out? You didn't know you had a daughter when you chose to party across the country with your mistress?" Desmond couldn't respond. The silence in the courtroom was louder than thunder. Then Amaka finally spoke, her first words since the session began. "He didn't break me," she said, her voice calm but full of power. "He only revealed who I truly am." Every head in the room turned. In that moment, Desmond realized something brutal and final. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost an empire. Silence lingered like smoke after Amaka's words echoed across the courtroom. Desmond sat frozen, gripping the edge of the bench as if it could anchor him back to reality. But the courtroom had already turned into a battlefield, and he was losing badly. The judge leaned forward, her tone now sharper, more deliberate. Mr. Ease, your actions show a consistent pattern of negligence, emotional abuse, and abandonment. You not only failed as a partner, but as a father. Do you have any justification for your actions? Desmond's lips parted, but no sound came. He looked to Tonia for support, but she was busy scanning the room with panic, avoiding every eye. Her confident composure had vanished, and in its place sat a girl realizing she had walked blindly into a war zone. Desmond finally found his voice, but it came out thin. I didn't know she was from such a family. If I had, the judge slammed her gavel once. So she wasn't the daughter of a billionaire. You wouldn't regret your actions. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. It was the wrong answer at the worst possible moment. Desmond, in his desperation, had revealed his true character. A man who only valued status and power. Amaka lowered her eyes for a brief moment, not in shame, but in acknowledgement. This was the man she once trusted. Barrister Okizi didn't even need to respond. The damage had already been done, but he delivered the final strike anyway. Your Honor, let the records reflect that the defendant's remorse is not based on the emotional pain he inflicted or on the welfare of his child, but purely on the lost opportunity to exploit her family's wealth. We seek maximum custody, full financial compensation, and court-supervised distance from both mother and child. As the judge nodded and made her ruling, the court's atmosphere shifted. Desmond was no longer just a defendant. He had become a public warning. When the ruling was read aloud, Desmond nearly collapsed. The court granted Amaka full custody, ordered immediate child support backdated to the month of eviction, and issued a non-approach restraining order. The judge added that Desmond's parental rights would only be reviewed if he completed 6 months of counseling and could prove financial and emotional stability, something he no longer had. Tonia was called next for questioning. At first, she refused to speak, claiming she was not part of the marriage. But when Chief Donald's legal team presented forged salary documents, manipulated business proposals, and tax fraud, all under her name, she was caught in a corner. Miss Tonia, the judge said, if you're not careful, this courtroom will become the beginning of your criminal record. Her voice broke as she whispered, I didn't know who she was. I thought she was just a broke housewife. A cold smile crept across Amaka's face, not out of vengeance, but justice. For once, the silence she carried had spoken louder than every insult. The aftermath of the court hearing was swift and merciless. Within hours, the news of Desmond's disgrace spread like wildfire. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like #AmakaTheQueen, #HeLeftRoyalty, and #BillionaireDaughterRevenge. Influencers analyzed clips from the courtroom, dissecting every moment, from Desmond's shameful excuses to Tonia's tearful collapse. Memes flooded Twitter, one comparing Desmond's regretful face to a goat under rainfall, another showing Amaka crowned as a queen walking past him. Desmond returned to his apartment a broken man. He had no job. He'd been terminated hours after the hearing due to company embarrassment. His landlord had placed an eviction notice on the door. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, but they weren't calls of sympathy, only lenders, reporters, and the few friends who now wanted to mock his downfall. Tonia didn't return with him. She was escorted to her office by legal authorities for questioning. There, she was suspended indefinitely. It turned out she had been under internal investigation for weeks. Chief Donald had long suspected her manipulation. The trip to Dubai she bragged about? Funded by stolen corporate reimbursements. Her fancy iPhone? Bought through an embezzled employee bonus pool. Her designer handbags? Returned one by one after the companies they were rented from sued her for damaged items. Within 72 hours, she went from a glam icon to an internet disgrace. Videos surfaced showing her insulting Amaka online before the case, telling a friend during a live stream that Desmond's wife is probably somewhere selling Puff Puff. Now, those same viewers called her the Puff Puff Queen of Shame. She tried to call Desmond, but he blocked her number. For once, both were finally alone, truly and painfully alone. Meanwhile, Amaka sat quietly in her new office at Obina Holdings, dressed in a black power suit with her natural hair wrapped in a silk scarf. Her baby slept beside her in a carrier while her team prepared reports. She was no longer the weeping girl begging to be loved. She had become something stronger, a woman reborn by fire, betrayal, and endurance. Her father entered the office with a soft smile, placing a framed plaque on her desk. It read, Director of Strategic Innovation, Amaka Obina. She blinked back tears as she whispered, I never wanted this to happen like this. Donald sat beside her. But it happened because of what he did. And now the world sees who you really are. She nodded, holding her child tightly. She didn't want revenge anymore. She wanted peace. But fate, it seemed, had more for her. Because her victory had just begun. Desmond, on the other hand, had only started to feel the consequences of mocking loyalty. Desmond couldn't walk down the street without hearing laughter behind him. Market women shouted insults as he passed. Oga downgrade. Nah, billionaire daughter you reject. Schoolboys shouted Zaddy way fall as he ducked behind kiosks. He had become a walking joke, a meme come to life. His last few possessions were sold just to afford a hotel room for the night, and even that was temporary. He applied for jobs, but was turned away everywhere. His former boss had issued a recommendation letter that subtly warned of dishonesty and poor decision-making. His bank account was frozen due to back child support obligations, and the few friends he once dined with now ghosted him. He tried reaching out to bloggers, hoping to clear his name, but none of them wanted to risk losing access to Chief Donald's network. Amaka had become a symbol of resilience, and no one wanted to be on the wrong side of her narrative. Desmond's spiral continued when he received a letter from his mother. She wrote, You have shamed this family. I warned you about chasing shadows. You lost the only woman who ever loved you. Don't come home. We are disgraced. He dropped the letter, breathing heavily. Sitting on the floor of the dirty hotel room he now called home. His phone lit up again. This time it was Tonia. He answered angrily, but her voice was filled with tears. They froze my accounts, Desmond. I might be arrested. I have no one to turn to. He laughed bitterly. You used me, he spat. You made me believe I had everything. She screamed back, You used me too. You wanted to climb through me. You threw away a queen for crumbs. Now we're both in the gutter. Then the call ended. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was all a dream. But no, this was reality. And it was his own making. Meanwhile, Amaka stood on the rooftop terrace of Obina Tower with Ziora in her arms. The sun painted the sky gold as the city pulsed beneath them. Her assistant came up with her phone and said, Ma, someone from BBC Africa wants an interview. They want to profile your story as a documentary. Amaka smiled faintly. Tell them I'll think about it. She looked down at her daughter. We don't need to speak. The world already saw what silence can do. Her father walked up moments later and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. If Desmond comes crawling, what will you say? She took a deep breath and replied, I'll tell him the truth. That I never wanted him to suffer. I just wanted him to see what he lost. And just then, below the building, a man in tattered clothes walked past the gate, looked up at the giant company logo, and paused. It was Desmond, looking up at the name he once mocked. And in that moment, his heart shattered anew. Desmond stood across the road from Obina Holdings, shielding his eyes from the scorching sun as luxury cars drove in and out of the gates. He looked like a man erased by time, beard unshaven, shirt stained, and shoes torn at the edges. Days had passed since he'd eaten a proper meal, but he couldn't bring himself to beg. Not yet. Not when the woman he once kicked out in the rain now sat at the top floor of a glass tower, making decisions that impacted millions. The weight of his choices crushed him every day. He often replayed moments he thought were trivial, The night she cried while cooking after work. The time she offered to help him build a business plan and he scoffed. The final moment she walked into the rain, holding her stomach and her pride. What if I had loved her better? He whispered to himself, tears filling his eyes. That evening, with trembling hands and a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket, he found the courage to go to Amaka's apartment. He had no plan, just desperation and guilt. The security guard recognized him and was about to turn him away, but Amaka, watching from a security feed, told them to let him in. He knocked softly, and when she opened the door, he fell to his knees instantly. "Please," he whispered, tears flowing freely. "I'm not here to take anything. I just want to see my daughter." Amaka looked at him. This man who had once called her a burden, who had laughed while she begged, who had humiliated her before the world. But she didn't speak out of rage. She lifted her daughter gently from the crib and let him see her. "This is Ziora," she said. "She cried for days when she was born, alone, just like I was." Desmond looked at the child, barely able to breathe. He broke down completely, sobbing into his hands, shaking as if possessed. "I've lost everything," he said. "My job, my reputation. My family won't even pick my calls. And Tonia, she used me and left me." Amaka remained still. "You didn't lose everything," she replied softly. "You gave it away, one insult at a time, one lie at a time, one betrayal at a time." Her words were not shouted, but they pierced deeper than any scream. Desmond begged for forgiveness. "Please, just let me be part of her life. I'll change. I'll prove it." But Amaka looked him straight in the eye and said, "This isn't about me forgiving you. This is about protecting her. And she deserves a man who loves her mother, not one who abandoned her." She gently closed the door, leaving him crouched at the entrance. Inside, she held her baby close, whispering, "He's not your future. You are." The next morning, Amaka stepped into the towering boardroom of Obina Holdings, wearing an emerald green power suit that matched the poise she had become known for. Her presence demanded silence, not because she raised her voice, but because of the way she carried her pain with dignity. The media frenzy around her recent victory had elevated her status across corporate Nigeria, and her father had officially named her as the future CEO. It was a title she hadn't asked for, but one she earned with scars, not shortcuts. As she began the weekly meeting, outlining expansion plans for a tech-based community outreach program for women entrepreneurs, a standing ovation erupted. For a moment, Amaka paused, overwhelmed. Not long ago, she had been sleeping on a hospital cot with a crying baby and no hope. Now, the very floor she walked on trembled with respect. Chief Donald Obina stood up and took the microphone. "I want to say something. Not as a CEO, but as a father." The room fell silent. "When my daughter married against my will, I was angry. Not because I hated her choice, but because I feared what would happen if that man failed to see her worth. And he didn't. But I've never been prouder to be wrong about her resilience. Amaka, you are the storm he never saw coming. You turned tears into strategy. You turned betrayal into brilliance. And I'm honored to call you my daughter." Tears welled in Amaka's eyes as she stepped forward and hugged her father tightly. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly safe. Not because she had money or power, but because she had rebuilt herself from nothing, and the man who once doubted her now stood proudly beside her. That evening, Amaka was invited to give a keynote speech at a prestigious women's conference. She walked onto the stage with Ziora in her arms, telling the story of how silence and humility are often mistaken for weakness, until the silent rise. She didn't name Desmond, but the world knew the story. She ended the speech with the words, "Your story isn't over when someone walks out on you. Sometimes that's when the real chapter begins." The applause was deafening. From the back of the hall, her father watched, tears hidden behind his sunglasses. Amaka had become everything he hoped for, and more, not because she had avenged herself, but because she had risen above vengeance. And in doing so, she had reclaimed everything that was stolen from her, and more. Tonia sat in the waiting room of her lawyer's office, fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. Her once flawless nails were chipped, her makeup uneven, and her designer bag replaced by a nylon purse. She had lost everything: her job, her income, her image. But the worst was yet to come. She still had one secret left, one desperate lie she hoped would save her. When her lawyer called her in, she handed him a brown envelope containing a fabricated pregnancy report. "I'm carrying Desmond's child," she said. "If the Obina family wants peace, they'll have to deal with me." Her lawyer looked at her with wide eyes. "You understand this is a felony, right?" She nodded. "Let them prove it's fake. Until then, I want a private meeting with Chief Donald." She had nothing left to lose, and was prepared to drag Desmond and Amaka back into scandal, if only to stay relevant. Chief Donald agreed to the meeting out of curiosity. Tonia walked into his office confidently, placing the forged document on his desk. "I thought you might want to keep your new daughter's reputation clean," she said. "Because if I go public with this, people will start asking questions." Donald didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed a button, and within seconds, 2 security agents entered, followed by a corporate doctor. "Let's do a live pregnancy test right now," he said. Tonia's face turned pale. I already took one. That should be enough." But Donald wasn't smiling. "You see, Tonia, you've already been under surveillance since the court hearing. We know about the man you've been seeing in Lekki. We know you forged this report. And we know Desmond hasn't touched you in months. So I suggest you stop before you bury yourself deeper." He pushed the file back across the table. "Leave. And pray I don't press charges." Tonia tried to protest, but her voice cracked. She turned and stormed out of the building, her world collapsing again, now with legal threats hanging over her head. Outside, she saw Desmond seated by a tree, eating bread from a paper bag. Their eyes met, but neither said a word. There was nothing left between them. No love, no lies, not even anger. Just emptiness. Tonia walked away silently. Desmond stared at her retreating figure and shook his head. This was the life I chose, he thought. A woman once loved him enough to leave her kingdom and build a palace with him, and he burned it down for borrowed gold. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, stood up, and limped away. He had nowhere to go. No one to call. Meanwhile, at the top floor of Obina Tower, Amaka tucked her baby into bed and whispered, "Tomorrow we rise again." The storm had passed. The sun had returned, and this time it was shining only on her. It had been exactly 6 months since the courtroom judgment. Desmond had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his dignity. He had bounced between temporary shelters, looking for work and battling depression in silence. The once proud man now looked like a shadow of himself, with sunken eyes and a fragile frame. Every day, he passed by the Obina Holdings building, watching from afar as black SUVs ferried important guests and executives into the marble structure. He often imagined Amaka sitting behind a glass desk, smiling at their daughter and making decisions worth millions. Every time that thought came, his heart ached with a grief that words couldn't explain. He had loved her once, in the beginning, but somewhere along the way, he chose pride and ego over patience and loyalty. And now, even his own reflection in the mirror wouldn't look back at him. One morning, he received a formal notice from Amaka's legal team. It was an invitation to finalize documents related to parental visitation rights, supervised ones, with strict terms. The letter was clear. He had no say in Ziora's upbringing, but Amaka was gracious enough to offer him a sliver of contact. Desmond knew it was more than he deserved. He showed up at the Obina Holdings building, this time not to beg or sneak glances from outside, but to face the consequences of the choices he had made. As he stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lobby, memories flooded his mind of the man he used to be, the woman who once worshipped him, and the child he never even cared to meet. When he was finally called into the conference room, his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. Amaka sat at the far end of the boardroom table, dressed in ivory white, calm and radiant. Beside her sat her father, regal as ever, and a legal representative with a thick file in hand. Desmond greeted them, his voice hoarse and barely audible. Amaka didn't smile. She simply nodded and gestured for the lawyer to begin. Terms were read, supervised visitation every other weekend at a neutral facility, no unscheduled appearances, and no interaction with the press. Desmond listened quietly, then asked for a moment. "Amaka," he said softly, "I just want to say I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I now see who you are, and I hate that it took losing you to realize it." Amaka looked at him, eyes steady. "Desmond," she replied, "you didn't lose me. You gave me away. You held gold in your hand and traded it for glitter. And now that glitter has turned to dust." There was silence. No argument. No defense. Just one man signing a paper, and a woman walking away, victorious and free. 2 months later, the city buzzed with excitement as Obina Holdings launched a historic partnership with an international tech firm to create Africa's largest innovation hub for women. The event was attended by diplomats, billionaires, global CEOs, and top government officials. But the most captivating moment of the night wasn't when deals were signed or awards were presented. It was when Amaka stepped on stage with Ziora in her arms to deliver her speech. The crowd rose to their feet in applause before she even spoke. She didn't speak of her ex-husband. She didn't relive her pain. Instead, she shared a vision for the future. "This initiative isn't just about business," she said. "It's about building safe places for women to grow. It's about raising daughters who will never have to beg to be seen or cry to be heard." Her voice was steady, her presence magnetic. She ended the speech with one line that echoed across every platform. "I am no longer the woman they threw away. I am the woman who came back to lead." Outside the venue, a small crowd had gathered to glimpse the powerful woman the entire country was talking about. Among the onlookers stood Desmond, dressed in a worn-out shirt, his shoes covered in dust. He watched as Amaka stepped into a waiting Rolls-Royce, escorted by her father and a team of security. The car door closed slowly, and for a brief second, Amaka's eyes met his through the tinted glass. She didn't look angry or bitter. She looked peaceful, as if she had finally closed the chapter. Desmond swallowed hard. His eyes stung. He didn't wave. He didn't approach. There was nothing left to say. As the car pulled away, he whispered, "That was supposed to be my life." But deep down, he knew he had destroyed it with his own hands. A man who once had everything, now had only regret. Back at her mansion later that night, Amaka walked onto the balcony with Ziora on her hip, staring out at the city lights below. Her daughter giggled as she reached for the stars, and Amaka smiled. The storm had passed. The betrayal, the pain, the humiliation, all of it had birthed a woman stronger than anyone imagined. Chief Donald walked up beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've made me proud, daughter," he said softly. Amaka looked at him and replied, "I didn't do it for pride. I did it for her." They both looked at Ziora, whose innocent eyes sparkled with joy. And in that moment, Amaka knew that her story would inspire countless women to rise from heartbreak, to fight for their worth, and to walk boldly into their destiny. She was no longer a forgotten wife. She was a legacy in motion, and she had already won. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.